We're at a fundamental crossroads. Digitalization can advance us more rapidly in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, or it can deepen exclusion, divide us further, increase inequality. The choice is ours. For the first time, digital technology can put economic power into the hands of people, the people that own today's global financial resources. What if every citizen was empowered to make financial choices that support the SDGs and was able to ensure that every last dollar was spent on what really matters to them, family, community, their country, and the planet? Let's put citizens in the driving seat by enabling them to use their savings to finance their long-term development. Increasingly, mobile platforms and data analytics are bringing sophisticated financial services to mass markets. Governments are digitalizing public finance, whilst a third of US public equity trades are now being carried out by computer-managed funds.
Digital technologies, which are revolutionizing financial markets, can be a game changer in reaching our shared objectives.
The UN Secretary General invited 17 global leaders from around the world in areas as diverse as financial regulation, policy, financial technology, financial institutions, and other experts to form a task force to consider how best to harness digitalization in advancing financing of the Sustainable Development Goals.
We have not begun to understand quite how transformative much of what we refer to perhaps as digital finance or fintech will be in the years to come.
What we've been tasked with is to look at digitalization and to try and understand how digitalization can be used and can be harnessed to finance the SDGs.
Today, they have completed their task, prepared a report that includes an ambitious action agenda that will fulfill the mandate that was set to them.
Here in Zimbabwe, 90% of the adult population is already registered on EcoCash, the mobile money platform. Because of this deep penetration, it enabled us to retool, repurpose rapidly during this COVID-19 crisis. Employers were still able to pay their employees while they were still at home without incurring any additional fees. We also launched a COVID digital insurance, where anyone who held insurance and came forward for testing, and if they tested positive for COVID, immediately received a $5,000 payout.
Our Pathfinder Initiative, the Digital Governance of Infrastructure Initiative, or as we call it, Infrastructure 360, enables investors, governments, citizens to have a complete view of nearly every piece of information about infrastructure projects globally. This will enable governance, but it will enable more funding to go to the right type of infrastructure projects to support the SDGs.
We are channeling domestic micro savings into mega investments and then using blockchain to track accountability of these funds. This would offer domestic micro savers a choice of projects that they will invest in, such as particular roads or bridges, sanitation systems, or hospitals. This approach would deliver significant reduction in the cost of capital as well as economic multiplier effects as dividends flow to poor Bangladeshi citizens.
All of these solutions require better digital infrastructure, enhanced capabilities, and universal access. Defenses are needed to ensure against cyber vulnerability, fraud, illicit financial flows, and algorithms that can discriminate against particular groups. Digitalization needs to enhance the alignment of finance with the SDGs rather than, for example, increasing short-termism or market concentration. Realizing these solutions, overcoming barriers and mitigating risks requires concerted actions by many different actors, by policymakers and financial regulators, by financial institutions in the markets themselves, including new fintech innovators, by development institutions operating at both the national level and the international level, as well as standards makers, experts, and civil society actors. Just as today's crisis has pushed us to take greater advantage of the digital world, so digitalization can help us to better align financing with the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you. Excellent. Excellencies, dear colleagues, it is now my pleasure to give the floor to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres.
The Task Force on Digital Financing of the SDGs, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. The COVID-19 pandemic has strained public health systems and disrupted national and local economies. It is already pushing tens of millions of people into extreme poverty and exacerbating inequalities of all kinds. In the midst of this turmoil, digital technology is a critical lifeline, enabling billions of people to maintain connections with loved ones, buy daily necessities, preserve their livelihoods, and receive government assistance. From mobile payments to crowdfunding, digital technology is already helping to meet development challenges. As we begin the decade of action to achieve the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, it can be a critical enabler, kickstarting the transformative changes we need to create stronger, more resilient and inclusive communities and societies on a healthy planet. That is the background to my decision in late 2018 to establish this high-level task force on digital financing of the Sustainable Development Goals. I asked the task force to explore the nexus of digital technology, finance and the SDGs, complementing the work of the high-level panel on digital cooperation. And I wanted to explore how digital innovation can put more of the $380 trillion in assets managed by the global financial system and the many trillions challenged through governments at the service of people and planet. The task force's report, People's Money Harnessing Digitalization to Finance a Sustainable Future, sets out an ambitious but achievable set of recommendations that could make a major difference in achieving our collective global goals. I urge everyone to study the recommendations closely and consider how we can take them forward together. I thank the task force members for their insights, energy and investment of time, especially during the pandemic, and express my particular gratitude to Achim Steiner and Maria Ramos for their leadership. I also thank the governments of Germany, Italy and Switzerland for the generous support and the many member states, institutions and individuals that contributed to the report's findings. Excellencies, dear friends, the task force has set out 5 catalytic opportunities to move public and private money into alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals. There is work to be done on all of these. But what has truly drawn my attention is the conclusion that digitalization will make a difference by giving people greater control over how global finance, their own money, is used. Whether it is channeled through markets or through state intermediaries, global finance is accountable to ordinary people. Taxpayers hold governments to account, while savers and investors need to hold financial institutions to account. And people, whether they are taxpayers, savers or investors, care deeply about their families, communities and our planet. So I fully endorse the task force vision of citizen-centric finance and its conclusion that the digitalization of finance must be inclusive and empowering so that it becomes a force for good. Currently, 3.6 billion people worldwide, including a disproportionate number of women, lack the resources and capabilities to take advantage of the digital world. Addressing this gap will contribute to the economic resilience of communities and national economies. It will also address gender inequality by enabling women to have greater power over how they make, spend, save and control their money. Today's report also highlights the importance of institutional arrangements to steer digital finance into alignment with the SDGs. The continued dislocation between our collective commitment to the SDGs and decision-making around public financing cannot continue. The task force therefore recommends strengthening the links between the governance of finance, including its transformative digital aspects, and policy goals and citizens' interests. Much can be done at the local and national level, but international cooperation is needed to make a real difference, and that cooperation cannot be confined to yesterday clubs of influential actors. Digitalization must democratize the governance of finance in order to democratize finance itself. Developing countries need and deserve a much greater role in formulating the policies and decisions that will impact their citizens. Excellencies, dear friends, thanks to the task force and to the many others who have taken part in formulating this powerful report, we now have an ambitious set of ideas to deliver financing for the Sustainable Development Goals by shifting the center of gravity of the financial system towards empowered citizens. Working with member states, we ourselves will be able to better harness digitalization in moving substantive resources to fund our own activities. Our current initiative on financing for development in the era of COVID-19 and beyond is an opportunity to bring the recommendations of the task force forward. The recovery from the current crisis must be driven by investments in digital solutions that support inclusive, green, and sustainable growth. The options that are being developed under our Financing for Development initiative must overcome the deepening digital divide and ensure that digital technologies are a key component of financing for a sustainable recovery. As Secretary General, I am fully committed to supporting the implementation of the recommendations in these reports, and I urge the entire United Nations system and its partners to do likewise. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary General, for your inspiring words. I would like to now give the floor to the co-chairs of the task force, Ms. Maria Ramos, former CEO of Absa Bank, and Mr. Achim Steiner, the administrator of the United Nations Development Programme. Ms. Ramos.
Thank you very much, Simon. Excellencies, Secretary General, friends, partners, and my esteemed task force colleagues. May I begin by thanking the Secretary General for his kind and inspiring remarks and congratulate him for the foresight in establishing the task force. How right you are, of course, that the crisis has painfully illustrated how important the digital transformation of finance truly is in addressing immediate development challenges. Digital money transfers permitted governments to provide immediate support to citizens, alleviating personal and family crises and helping stabilize economies. E-commerce has become a lifesaver for millions of households and hundreds of thousands of small businesses. Digital finance can and must be far more. It's central to our longer-term efforts to build back better, and the Task Force Action Agenda provides a guide for just that. Leading a major bank in South Africa, a country with a fairly sophisticated financial system, my experience has been that financial institutions and markets can and must do more to align with people's needs. Similarly, we see around the world many instances of public finance, people's hard-earned tax dollars, being used inefficiently or worse still, not being applied to the public good at all. In a world awash with financial resources, the task force has focused on how to better align these flows with people's needs. Major tangible opportunities to deploy finance more smartly with associated risks in mind. Digitalization must be a servant to this purpose, to more effectively align finance with the needs and goals of the people it is meant to serve, as expressed in the Sustainable Development Goals. 18 months on, I am pleased to say, Secretary General Guterres, that we can be more than satisfied with our work based on the ambitious goal and the ambitious framing you set for us. Whilst innovation is to be applauded, we focused on how to impact the big numbers in recommending action in advancing several catalytic opportunities. The $185 trillion channeled through global bond and equity markets, the almost 20% of the global economy driven by public finance, the trillions needed to be invested in climate change mitigation and adaptation, renewable energy, and scaling carbon markets. And the some 5 trillion annually needed to finance small and medium-sized enterprises, the source of much of the world's employment and livelihoods. We have named our targeting of financial flows as catalytic opportunities because their scale and importance means that they can deliver both direct positive outcomes as well as encourage the financial system to accelerate the shift in orientation. As yes, purpose and accountability are needed to sustainably deliver on the SDGs. Let me mention just one example of this. We save globally some $23 trillion annually, a tripling over the last 2 decades. Least developed countries have increased their savings 15-fold to $250 billion annually over the same period. Digitalization can help to aggregate and channel these savings, including micro savings, to fund local sustainable infrastructure by creating partnerships between policymakers, finance, and digital payments platform businesses. This can reduce the cost of capital and improve the returns to citizens, particularly women and the youth. This is a major departure from the past, where large projects were primarily financed through large public and private institutions and sophisticated financial and capital markets. The report contains a range of other extraordinary opportunities digitalization offers, including systems to reduce illicit financial flows and the increase of both the effectiveness and accountability of public finance. I want to touch on one more piece of the task force's ambitious action agenda before passing over to my co-chair, that of governance. Good governance perhaps seems obvious, particularly in the UN context, given its core mandate on this matter. Having worked both in the corporate and public end of finance, there is no doubt that governance innovations are urgently needed. I am pleased to say that they feature prominently in the task force's deliberations and recommendations. For digital to make a difference, it has to be harnessed in creating a citizen-centric finance that serves people's needs now and into the future, and that helps ensuring that we leave no one behind. Delivering this needs markets and policies and policy innovations working in harmony. Let me cite just a few examples. We need to secure people's rights over their own data and data markets. We need to mitigate the risks inherent in market concentration, resulting from increased global scale of payments, data, and tech platforms. We need to make international regulation of digital finance more inclusive of developing country voices and more comprehensive in taking the SDGs into account. The fruits of the task force's work, set out in our final report, show how we can deliver a citizen-centric financial system, thereby building back better and delivering on the promise and commitment embodied in the SDGs. Secretary General, it has been an honor and a privilege for me to serve as co-chair of this task force. I want to thank you, and I also want to thank my co-chair, Achim Steiner, for his exceptional leadership, his inspiring leadership, in fact, of the task force and our work. It's been an exciting journey, and a journey of learning for me, certainly. Thanks also to all of the members of the task force, our knowledge partners, and our secretariat, ably led by Simon Zadek. I commend the report to you, and I trust that you will encourage, as you've said, the UN and the many others to take its recommendations in full, and that we will see their implementation through. Thank you very much, and over back to you, Simon.
Thank you, Maria. Indeed. Let me pass over to your co-chair, Achim Steiner. Achim, please.
Thank you, Simon. Secretary General, dear colleagues, I want to begin by thanking you, Secretary General, for the foresight that you brought to the United Nations when you established a digital cooperation panel, and when you then gave us the task of putting together a task force that would look at a particular challenge in this day and age, namely a rapidly emerging financial system in which digital technology is transforming many things very quickly. And yet we have an SDG agenda that in so many contexts and countries is still looking for a way in which to connect to this digital finance universe as a way of accelerating the SDGs. It has been an honor to serve as co-chair on this task force and alongside Maria Ramos, whose extraordinary experience in so many leadership roles in post-apartheid South Africa, and most recently as a CEO of South Africa's leading institution in the finance sector. That experience, that expertise was something that was vital for the task force to be able to attract its membership. And I want to also thank this amazing group of 15 leaders and innovators who made up the task force. I think both Maria and I felt enormous pressure after the first meeting because we realized that we had assembled some of the pioneers on a global level from the private sector, the technology and financial sectors, central bank governors, our colleagues in the UN family, but also many others who played such a significant role in shaping the task force's direction. I want to thank Judith Karl and UN Capital Development Fund, with whom together UNDP and UNCDF, we hosted the Secretariat Task Force, and UNCDF has certainly been one of the pioneers in our UN family in understanding and exploring the potential for digital finance. I want to thank also Germany and Italy, who, at your request, Secretary General, stepped forward to enable the task force to be able to do its work and to engage over the last 18, 19 months with many people around the world. And I want to thank the thousands of individuals and organizations who have engaged with the task force. It has been a remarkable process of learning from those who are driving that change, but also learning from those who are learning the lessons of how best to shape this ecosystem of digital finance. I want to also thank the Secretariat. Secretary General, in the midst of COVID-19, we had a moment of doubt. Is this the moment to bring to you the final report of the task force? In the midst of COVID-19, with so many lessons being learned literally every day, we still managed to complete the work, and we're very proud to submit this report to you today, and indeed to the world that is listening in this live launch. Secretary General, you set the context, so let me very quickly just move to a little bit of imagination. Digitalization is already a force for good in aligning finance with people's needs. We have come across so many extraordinary examples, pioneering, sometimes small scale, sometimes literally transforming an entire sector. Imagine for a moment a farming cooperative connected to a digital marketplace where it sells produce. Its members are able to access financing based on their transaction history, and they can get insured against climate risk with automatic payout in the moment of a disaster. This is not science fiction, it is happening. Let's imagine a multi-million-dollar infrastructure project in a country, be it a bridge, a road, power connections, or perhaps schools, being financed through millions of small investments made from ordinary people's micro savings. We have learned from Kenya, we have learned from Bangladesh. This is not science fiction, it is happening, and it is putting domestic savings directly at the service of national development financing in ways that we did not ever see before. Imagine for a moment the $30 trillion that could be invested in the global financial markets in alignment with the policies and citizens' choices through the use of smart data and analytics. We will hear more from our panelists in a moment of how this is no longer science fiction. It is already happening, and it is literally billions of dollars that are being transacted. Now, to some, these might still sound like exotic cases, perhaps exemplary of a future potential. I think COVID-19 has taught us one very dramatic lesson. Things that we might have anticipated last December to begin to occur in 3 or 5 years' time have suddenly been fast forwarded. Governments, the private sector, technology companies are literally implementing in a matter of weeks what some thought was a kind of future perspective. Secretary General, the task force was from the beginning very focused, and I thank again Maria's leadership here, because she said what this report should not be is another document that ends up on the shelves of a Secretary General and those who were involved in it. It is meant to speak to leaders in government, in the financial, in the tech sector, to citizens, and also to the whole UN family, because it has a central and key role to play here alongside countries. In my day job as administrator of UNDP, I run an organization that is daily trying to assist countries and governments to deal with the dilemma of how to mobilize financing for the critical investments to drive sustainable development forward. We live in a world and at a time where there is more money, more wealth than ever in the history of humanity on this planet. And yet, when you look at the struggle to secure financing, public and private, for the kinds of transformative pathways, investments, and programs that are needed, we encounter this extraordinary phenomenon that there are many who want to invest money, but they cannot find places where to invest. And there are many more who are looking for money and cannot source and access this funding. We believe that the digital finance revolution that is unfolding is not a silver bullet, but it is certainly going to be a transformative factor that is principally, first of all, creating new opportunities. It is also bringing people into the financial system who simply did not exist on its radar just 5 or 10 years ago. Poor people without an address, without collateral, without banking and credit records simply could not access finance. But also developing countries need to look at their domestic savings as part of being able to leverage international investments. We have learned a lot, and I want to thank also in particular my 3 senior colleagues from the United Nations that you asked to serve on this task force, Liu Jimin, Henrietta Fore, and Pumzile, heading the Department of Economic Social Affairs, UNICEF, and UN Women. They are amongst those who have been studying and also bringing to the task force that developmental perspective on digital finance. But the UN does not work alone. One of the things that the task force was able to do was to identify the extraordinary growth in partnerships between private and public sector, between citizens and companies, between providers and platforms, and national development objectives. I want to acknowledge the pioneering work that many leaders in the private sector have brought to this discussion, and it was they in the task force who were most clear in their minds of why the United Nations, as a global organization, as a platform, as a convener, as you also articulated in the Digital Cooperation Panel agenda, but also as a partner, as a capacity builder, as a partner in also bringing new consortia together, has a critical role in helping this evolution to happen. But perhaps most importantly, many governments and actors in the industry have realized, as Maria pointed out, governance is a critical part. Digital finance may be led by technology possibilities, but the financial system, an inclusive and sustainable contribution to national development and indeed to the evolution of our financial system at this moment in time, will require an ecosystem of innovation. For these ideas to succeed and not only simply be a technology possibility, we need good governance, we need policies, we need regulatory frameworks. These are the kinds of things that also in the past we have learned actually turn a technology into a success story in the history of development. Let me end by simply re-emphasizing what the task force, I think, brought to the fore. We often forget, and this is partly a result of the last 50 years, that the financial system is a complex beast. It is vast, it is very difficult for citizens to understand, but in having an entire industry of intermediation emerge over these decades, we have sometimes lost sight of the fact that the money that we often talk about, that wealth that the world has accumulated, is people's money. It is their savings. It is the taxes that they entrust to public institutions. It is their pension funds into which they pay. This is the wealth that we talk about when we speak about how digital finance can better connect people's money to people's objectives about the future. And this, Secretary General, I think, is the extraordinary moment of opportunity. The SDGs are a compass not only for 2030, but also for getting through this crisis. They are a way of bringing together the financial, the technology sectors, the private sector, with governments who are facing extraordinary choices right now. It is a difficult time for the world. And I think the task force delivers to you this report today, not with any sense of being able to control what happens next. None of us, in fact, I think can second guess what the future will look like. But it requires many actors to turn a digital possibility into a digital dividend and not into something that might amplify inequalities more, and even at a global level may leave many developing countries simply as passive takers of global corporate or other solutions developed by dominant players in this field right now. This is in part why the United Nations is such a critical convening platform, and this is why the UN agencies, funds and programs working with countries and partners in real economies can play such a critical role in helping to develop that ecosystem of innovation. It has been a privilege to serve in this task force, and I can assure you it has already changed fundamentally the outlook of UNDP in the way we look at digital as an integral part of the future of development. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary General, dear co-chairs, thank you very much for those remarks. I think that frames the work that the task force has been hard at work at over the past 18 months. In 3 or 4 minutes, we'll turn to, I think, what will be a very interesting panel. But before that, we just wanted to give you a few insights into the kind of core mandate and findings of the task force itself. So you'll find now on our website, www.digitalfinancingtaskforce.org, a full array of products that we have released over the last few minutes and that really go into some detail around many of the points that have already been raised by the Secretary General and the 2 co-chairs. Just to clarify really what the mandate was that was provided to the task force, recommend, but not just recommend, but also to catalyze ways in which it was possible to harness digitalization in accelerating financing of the SDGs. Digitalization, mobile payment platforms, IoT, blockchain, cryptocurrencies, big data, artificial intelligence. One has to unpack that term to really understand the complexity of the technological ecosystem that we were asked to look at. And our challenge was not to look far distant into the future, too many uncertainties exist, but to look forward at the ways in which digital was already disrupting financial and capital markets and also private finance, to look for transformational system-level ways in which digital might make a difference, to look for opportunities that were catalytic, that could really not just deliver shifts in the flows of finance, but begin to resculpture the way in which global finance actually operates as it relates to the SDGs. And of course, ultimately, what really counts is that we were pushed, obviously, to be extremely practical in setting out recommendations that were implementable and that would make a difference. Maria and Achim and the Secretary General have already highlighted, if you like, the apex of the work that sits within the action agenda that the task force is recommending. And the apex is not so much its extensive findings, but are the 5 large catalytic opportunities that it has spent some time analyzing, setting out and pointing to many examples as to how action can be taken. They span, for example, the ability to move domestic savings into long-term development finance, that hard nut to crack of using digital to enhance financing of small and medium-sized businesses, the primary source of employment around the world, how effectively to increase the effectiveness and accountability of public finance, to move from that $30 trillion already in financial and capital markets that are screened against the SDGs to embrace that broader agenda of $185 trillion that better data, better analytics, more interventions will allow to be more effectively aligned. And of course, ultimately, people's individual consumption and that growth in online consumption in its very many different forms, providing the opportunity for digital to inform consumers more effectively as to how they consume in ways that are more aligned to their broader needs. The catalytic opportunities obviously are out there in the way in which the task force has described, but there is an awful lot that needs to be done in order to really avail oneself of those opportunities at scale. The task force, beyond the opportunities themselves, has pointed to the importance of, if you like, developing sophisticated, sustainability-orientated digital finance ecosystems at the national level, starting with those fundamentals, effective digital infrastructure that is accessible to all, but touching on what are often much more complex issues to do with the way in which data is owned and managed, who controls it, where it flows, its ability to drive innovation, and of course, ultimately, the ability of citizens to make use of data, to understand their choices, and to act individually and collectively in order to push, in reality, their agency in driving forward a citizen-centric finance. And then we have touched, as Maria and Achim have mentioned, on both governance at a national level and also governance at an international level, and making really the point that as big tech turns into big fintech, larger and larger digital platforms that are driving financial services across borders into all countries in the world, there is a need to really step back and ask, how can we make the governance of this new fintech ecosystem more inclusive, bringing in many different actors from different countries, and how can we broaden its lens of relevance by bringing the SDGs more directly to bear in governance, regulation, policy, and standards decisions. As part of our catalytic work, as well as the recommendations that we've set out, we have helped to create a number of Pathfinder initiatives. These are not silver bullet solutions, but they fit within the action agenda that we've set out in, we think, really exemplifying the kind of ambitious action that can be taken. And you can see they span the ones that we have driven across a number of different aspects of the action agenda that we have set out, from large-scale digital governance innovations through to ways in which domestic savings can be effectively mobilized for development financing, through to measurement frameworks and other approaches, as you can see on the screen. We would encourage you to look at these different Pathfinder initiatives, not only to be inspired or driven in what they are in themselves, but to be, if you like, pushed within your own context to create comparable initiatives moving forward. And then finally, kind of who's got to do it? And we've spent some considerable time trying to drill out amongst the many different actors that we have engaged with over the 18 months, really what are the different tasks that different parts of that community need to take on. And we've literally unpacked the action agenda and the underlying recommendations, rebundled many of the recommendations into different parts to try and point out, what is it that development finance institutions need to do? What is it that the UN needs to do? What can policymakers and financial regulators and central banks do? And so on. So with that, hopefully that provides a little bit more of the detail underlying many of the comments that have been made by the Secretary General and the co-chairs. And I would suggest that we move directly on to the panel. We have 4 members of the task force representing, if you like, the task force views as well as their own institutions. We have Jela Pasabasha-Olo, who's the Vice President of the World Bank Group, Eric Ying, Executive Chairman of the Ant Group, Natalie Jabangwe, Chief Executive Officer of EcoCash, and Patrick Njoroge, Governor of the Central Bank of Kenya. 4 of the 15 members, apart from the co-chairs, who are going to share some of their thoughts with us today. So welcome to all of you. Thank you very much indeed for attending the launch, but obviously thank you very much for the many contributions that you've made over the last 18 months. I wanted to kick off by asking each of you perhaps to address at a high level a fairly straightforward question. You've been part of this task force now for 18 months, working actively yourself and your colleagues in contributing to it. And we would be keen to hear what insights really you have gained from working with this task force and exploring the mandate that it has been given, and how are those insights perhaps most relevant to the work that you do yourselves within your institutions? And Sheila, if I may, I will start with you.
Thank you, Simon. It has been a real privilege to serve as a member of this task force. The agenda we have worked on could not have been more relevant given the current circumstances. And it's really a part of our work at the World Bank Group, and the insights that we gained through this extremely competent group has been very relevant for our work. So I'm going to talk about three key insights. The first is what Maria and Akim also mentioned, is that world's resources are people's money, intermediated by public and private institutions. That clearly resonates with us at the World Bank Group. When we started the discussions at the task force, we initially focused a lot on retail digital finance, essentially, basically the power of digital technology to increase financial inclusion and access by those that are most vulnerable and those that are excluded. We then broadened the discussion to also include, as you mentioned, digitally enabled improvements in social and environmental data for improving SDG considerations across financial and capital markets, and in particular, the potential of digitalization to enhance public finance. And this is becoming all the more important and urgent given the COVID-19 pandemic and what we have been going through. At the bank, we have a very substantive joint World Bank IFC financial inclusion agenda, partnering with other public and private partners. We have a public database with SDG relevant data, an ESG portal, and working with governments to enhance their IT systems and embrace open data and digitalization. And keeping individuals at the center of policy decisions is really a key component of very many of our operations, and especially from the discussions at the task force, making sure that citizen engagement is really at the core of our operations in this area. Second point is that the task force highlights the disconnect between digital finance policies and national sustainable development priorities and associated financing plans. We are working with many of our partner countries to ensure that this is incorporated in their development financing strategies. I will mention one key initiative, which is the Digital Economy for Africa. This is a regional project for the continent of Africa and very substantive issue to improve efficiency, transparency, and effectiveness of development finance. Third, last but not least, we discussed very much within this group and with really different perspectives, given the richness of this task force, on the barriers and risks, and factored in a lot of these actions to address them in the recommendations that the report brings. And that is really key in terms of making sure that the digital infrastructures are there, the regulatory and legal capacity is there, to make sure that the full potential is achieved. So those were the three key takeaways, three key issues that I'm really working with a lot of our colleagues at the World Bank Group to ensure that we embrace this and really incorporate it in our financial assistance, in our technical assistance, and partnership with both member countries, but also other institutions. Thank you.
Sheila, thank you very much. Let me move straight on to Eric. Eric, you are the head of one of the world's most extraordinary, perhaps, pure digital finance institutions. It would be fantastic to hear your reflections on what insights you've gained in being part of the task force process.
Thank you, Simon. It's been a privilege to work with the task force members over the last 18 months. Thank you again for this opportunity. And one key task force insight we should focus on is how to leverage digitalization to deliver inclusive and sustainable finance at scale. Since Alipay launched in 2004, Ant Group has been committed to promoting a digital inclusive financial system serving the underserved and unserved, with a focus on individuals and small businesses, the bottom 80% of our economy. So China has had the imaginary line dividing the East and West. They called it the Hu Huanyong line or Hu line, named after a famous geographer in 1933. While similar in size, the two regions had vast differences in GDP and population density. Actually, over the past 80 years, neither policy nor market forces were successfully in closing the regional gap. Thanks to the development of the digital economy, the digital technology, the Hu line has gradually disappeared. In the past 8 years, economic inequality between the East and West has greatly reduced. Today, many young people move to the West in China to seek opportunities. Here are some examples of how the gap has been narrowed. A Himalayan tent shop owner who had to travel half a day to the nearest bank branch now uses digital payment for his business. Today, every small shops in China can enjoy equal access to such type of convenient, lower cost, and a secure digital payment services. A small merchant who was never served by a bank could access to working capital loan as low as 1 RMB yuan through our digital platforms. He can pay back the loan at any time without prepayment penalty. A 20-year-old woman in the countryside could access to the same investment products as a bank president working in Shanghai. She could start investing with just 1 RMB. So over the last 16 years, Ant Financial, by partnering with the over 2,000 financial institutions, we have built what we call a capillary digital financial systems, reaching out to those unserved little guys. So capillary financial systems to complement the artery financial systems, which is operated by the major financial institutions focused on big guys. So today, UnDP serves over 1 billion of users, of which 700 million can enjoy a variety of the digital financial services across consumer credit, wealth management, and digital insurance. So this is an inclusive development story of how scale is aggregation of many little guys through digital technology and innovation. Thank you. That's my sharing. Simon, back to you.
Eric, thank you very much. And certainly the name of the Ant Group really connects so well to our sense of that aggregation of the many small into large scale. So thank you for your remarks and obviously your work. Natalie, you have inspired us and in many ways driven our work over the past 18 months, as well as being the CEO of EcoCash in Zimbabwe. Please, what insights have really come to you over that 18-month period?
Simon, thank you very much indeed. As already has been highlighted by our co-chairs, Maria and Simon, including His Excellency the Secretary General, digital disruption creates that his findings. There are more than 2 billion people today who are spending dollars online or through mobile platforms. And as a result, we now have more and better data, which helps us to drive innovative products and business models, which allow us to offer more affordable transactions and intermediate costs. So as the CEO of a leading mobile payments company in Zimbabwe, I am constantly asking myself, what data have we used for us to be able to design the products and services that we're offering to our consumers? How can we make our services more relevant and affordable so that we can be creating business models that are easily tested and rolled out and create value to the consumer who so needs them? And so for us, it's even more important, particularly in this crisis, And so the task force has highlighted that there is often a disconnect between countries' sustainable development objectives and countries' financial plans on one hand, and also fintech-based innovation on the other hand. In our context here in Zimbabwe, what this means for us is how do we focus on providing a channel that allows consumers to transact safely, especially during this COVID-19 crisis, enabling consumer payments that go to the value chains that really fuel the economy. And these are namely the agricultural sector, the manufacturing sector, and even as far beyond as the clean energy sector. But without a doubt, looking at how we can actually provide SME financing tools to the lifeblood that drives the economy. And these are the actors who are in the micro, small to medium enterprises. Thank you, Simon.
Natalie, thank you very much. Let me move straight on to Governor Patrick Njoroge. Last but by no means least, Patrick, you are one of two regulators that have participated in the task force, and you have certainly participated extremely actively. We would welcome your remarks on what insights perhaps you have gathered during your time with the task force.
Simon, and again, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. I have to say that my participation in the task force was, for the most part, was very fruitful, particularly because of the other task force members that we were working with. But working in the task force allowed me first to deepen my appreciation of the opportunities that are provided by digital finance. That is something that we always knew, but I think we deepened in our appreciation of how much more we can do. Secondly, the element of grasping the possibilities that are provided to us from the perspective of their impact on citizens. And this is the element of people centricity, which was underscored by the speakers before me, including our co-chairs at the beginning. So this was important, but crucially with regard to the SDGs. So for instance, coming into 2020, and the beginning and being faced by the unprecedented shock of COVID-19, our appreciation and experiences in digital finance allowed us to form a quick response. So measures that we put in place quickly, and these were for measures that would lead to reduction in the use of cash. And for that matter, we also increased the transaction limits so as to allow wider usage of digital transactions on the mobile phone, etc. We also waived costs on low-value transactions, and this was intended to promote official and private transfers, particularly amongst the most vulnerable. All these ideas, we were able to, in a sense, hit the ground running, because of the appreciation that we had in the discussions we had acquired in the discussion over the year before that. A second element is, of course, a realization that we have actually seen a deterioration with respect to the implementation of the SDGs. This is over the last 6 months. And we know that we've seen the various poverty indicators, health, education, SME finance, all these have been, in some sense, weakened over the last 6 months. But my experience in the task force has allowed us to see and grasp the significant potential of digital finance to leapfrog with respect to the SDGs, precisely in these areas. So it's not so much now getting worried that we've fallen so far back, but rather, yes, we can actually leapfrog. The frightening possibility of 2030 is going to be with us soon. That, I think the issue here is we can actually leapfrog and succeed, even though there's less time to get, less time is left before the target. This is something that we feel that that sense of positivism, I think that really came from the task force. That now more than ever before, the possibilities of achieving the SDGs lie before us. And instead of worrying, well, should we wait more or should we have more time? Actually, the issue here is let's grab the possibilities that are before us set by digital finance and leapfrog, transform in this way to achieve the SDGs. Thank you.
Patrick, thank you. And I think it's very helpful in a sense for you to kind of end the frame of the first round by coming back to the COVID crisis. I think for those who find time to dip into the substance of both the summary and the full report, will see that the overall frame is set as an unprecedented crisis meets a historic opportunity. And really it's at the nexus of those two tsunamis of time, if you like, that I think your comments lie, Patrick, but also much of our work has really been framed. Panelists, thank you for your opening comments. I'm going to come back, if you like, for a second round with one eye on the clock. And I wanted perhaps, following more or less the same, so starting with you, Chela, to perhaps ask you just to draw out one recommendation or one Pathfinder initiative from the task force, just one, that you feel you would like to highlight to the assembled participants as well as others going forward. So perhaps, Chela, I could start with you.
Thank you. And I want to underline what Patrick mentioned, Governor Patrick mentioned, which is really making sure that there's optimism and that we take actions to make sure that the divide that's going to unfortunately widen because of COVID-19, that we take steps to ensure that we minimize that as much as possible. And I think for that, I would like to mention a key issue is going to be digital connectivity, making sure that the infrastructure is there. And that's in very much focus of the report as well, both in terms of IT infrastructure, ID infrastructure, identification, as well as the payment systems that needs to be in place. So really focusing on these issues where so that we can support the SDG financing will be critical. We have our DFI meeting in November, and this is going to be really a key focus given the impact of digitalization and the potential it provides in the current circumstances. Thank you.
Chela, thank you. And obviously, we've drawn on the wealth of work that the World Bank Group is doing in this space, as well as the insights and experience of every task force member. I think clearly, as you've mentioned it, this extraordinary array of 400 development finance institutions coming together in November, and certainly from the task force, we would hope there would be an opportunity to kind of bring some of its recommendations and findings, and if you like, insights into that conversation. So thank you for raising that in particular. Eric, Ant does many different things. It would be interesting to hear from you, perhaps just one of the recommendations or Pathfinder initiatives that has struck you as being particularly important to communicate to participants.
Thank you, Simon. I'd like to talk about the human capital. I have been fortunate enough to visit many countries and listen to all types of people, from governors to business leaders, from mom and pop shop owners to the local workers. I realized that a key issue is talent development and citizen capabilities. To address this, actually in October 2018, we jointly launched with the World Bank Group a non-profit talent cultivation programs called 10 times 1,000 Tech for Inclusion. So our goal is to build an open platform to cultivate 1,000 technology leaders in emerging markets annually over the next 10 years. To date, the program has trained over 3,000 tech leaders and engineers from over 40 countries, particularly in Asia and Africa. So we believe in the power of open platforms. So we also encourage others to join this program so that we together can support our future human capital. I believe that the digital transformation taking place today represents a huge opportunity to create more citizen-centric solutions to empower and train talents the next generations by leveraging more people-for-people platforms and innovations so we can seize these opportunities. Thank you. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Eric, very much indeed. And it certainly seems apt that you highlight the human resources side. Of course, Jack Ma has a historic leadership in the education space, and connecting the dots between these two agendas certainly seems something that Ant is well placed to take leadership on going forward, both in China but also internationally. So thank you very much. Natalie, let me pass over to you really the same question. Out of the many things that are analysed and discovered and talked about and then recommended through the task force report, also the 7 Pathfinder initiatives, one of which is being led by you, I wonder which piece of it you'd really sort of pick out and amplify to the participants here today.
Thank you, Simon. Let me reiterate again that digitalization itself is the real opportunity here for us to be able to unlock the sustainable development goals, particularly in finance. We've already learnt about the great examples of work that firms like Ant Financial Services, EcoCash here in Zimbabwe have done. But what I think really challenged me on the task force was that, but how much more can be done by realizing keystone and catalytic opportunities that stem from these current breakthroughs of numerous globally available digital financial offerings that already exist today? It was really the question that was posed by task force members as to how financial inclusion can support the priorities of those who are already served by perhaps empowering their savings, taxes, and cash flows. And so during this 18-month journey, together with a few members, the UNCDF, IEX, the only digital stock exchange in the United States, and ourselves as EcoCash, came together and looked at the power of payment data, how data could define eligibility and raise equity financing for the bottom small businesses who are small to medium enterprises who are typically not saved by traditional banks in a very well-meaning manner. We rarely used the same principle as financial inclusion, but translating that to capital markets. So we designed and piloted a concept of what is potentially the first in the world digital-only MSME-dedicated stock exchange, which draws upon payment data, sectoral information, geographic location coordinates to provide robust due diligence for prospective listing for debt and equity financing. Now, the reality here is that if we can be the first to dream up stuff like this in Zimbabwe, we're really not going to be the last, Simon. It is things like this that have been proven in small developing nations like ourselves that could really be better done in places like the United States or Singapore and from far more advanced nations. And of course, there is always the argument that, look, we have to figure out risks such as data privacy, fraud, or embezzlement. And that is absolutely true. But then risks should not stop us from harnessing the gains. Risks are there and are meant to be mitigated. And of course, it's not just about doing. It is also about measuring. So we also step beyond report development with another key Pathfinder initiative by a task force partner, the GDFA, who have developed a tool that helps us to measure these catalytic efforts of how much a nation has gone in driving sustainable digital finance at country level. So there are all these tools, not just to create, but it is also very much important for us to be able to measure the progress.
Thank you. Well, Natalie, you cheated. It was 2, not 1, but absolutely 2 that are worthwhile highlighting. So thank you for that. And I was thinking as you were speaking, you know, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange was the first stock exchange in the world really to drive environmental and social criteria into their disclosure requirements. And I think as time goes on, Zimbabwe will be remembered and emulated as really the first country to create this unique kind of stock exchange using payments data in really a sort of a breakthrough manner. So that's absolutely fantastic. Patrick, I'm going to pass over to you, another leader from the continent in the digital space. Obviously, you'll want to pick out the pieces that you want to highlight. I'm hoping that you will touch on an initiative that you have agreed to take a leadership role that has sort of spun out of the task force in the governance space. But passing over to you.
Thank you very much, Simon. Very briefly, first, there's an item that has been highlighted in the report and also in your remarks about a platform, or should we say a product that would help increase savings of our general population and channel this to infrastructure investment. That is something that we in Kenya have obviously been leading, and we call it Emakiba, but that is something that I'm sure others can pick up in the report, and Bangladesh has done very well in this. So it is something that I think I needed to highlight. Secondly, there is this concern which you highlighted also of the global digital finance platforms that we have. And the question is, these are big tech companies, and not only in the US, but around the world as well. And we are concerned, of course, that they are not so much people-centric. So the people-centricity element does not come in. It's more technology-centric, or for that matter, innovator-centric. So the concern here, of course, is that the people side of things, for instance, consumer protection, data privacy, or even excluding a significant, let's say, the vulnerable members of our population, things like that, will happen if their development or their implementation is not people-centric. So we have proposed, and this is one of the Pathfinder initiatives that is highlighted in the report, a dialogue of governance, global governance of these big tech companies, and which should include developing nations, and really try to see if we can have a framework that protects the people, or it puts people in the center of finance and puts in the center of this discussion. So we are very grateful that the Swiss authorities have also supported this, and we will be pushing this Pathfinder initiative, I think for the good of the people of the world. Thank you, Simon.
Patrick, thank you. And certainly all of the Pathfinder initiatives are ambitious in their own way and breakthroughs potentially as they move forward. But certainly this piece, a real attempt to innovate in the governance of finance at an international level, is both a challenge and an absolute imperative. Patrick, Natalie, Eric, Sheila, we have, by my clock, just 4 or 5 minutes before I'm going to hand over to the co-chairs to conclude the session. And I'm going to ask you each, perhaps in reverse, if I may, starting with Patrick and ending with Sheila, just to offer, perhaps for a minute each, some thoughts on where you think the UN can make the most difference in advancing this agenda. Clearly, you're not in the steering, not in the driving seat of the UN, but you have an awful lot of people listening, including Achim and other heads of agencies. And so this would be a moment certainly to say your piece. So Patrick, let me start with you.
Thank you, Simon. I think the UN needs to continue to leverage its convening power and to disseminate the lessons from the task force. And there are many points in there in the reports. And so in as much as can be done, there has to be sort of an all-out effort to bring this at all levels, to bring all the recommendations of the task force to the various discussions, fora, and so forth. And I think the other element here is to carry forward the Pathfinder initiatives, which may be nurtured elsewhere, but I think the United Nations does have or should take responsibility in supporting the development of these Pathfinder initiatives. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Patrick. Natalie, let me pass it over to you.
Thanks very much indeed, Simon. My personal view is really that success in building better beyond this crisis is going to depend on fostering continued innovation that serves people's money, which is already under pressure, particularly with COVID-19. We must be able to guard against a deepening divide between the rich and the poor, particularly where finances are concerned. Therefore, Secretary General, I would implore that the UN should help accelerate the full-scale opportunity that digitization today can deliver to the masses. You know, we often speak of basic citizen rights, and part of that must include a citizen's digital finance right. And this really could be done through continued catalyzed investments, not to just go to pilot, but to scale SDGs, to mobilize convening sustainable digital finance stakeholders, regulators especially, to accelerate the necessary policies and institutional mechanism to mitigate against backward-looking or slow-moving regulations at country level. We must also improve capabilities targeted at technical assistance to market players, to support policymakers and regulators to drive consumer awareness and consumer adoption of digital platforms. Particularly now, our failure to act in this world would be wasting a good crisis. Today, access to a bank account, to a phone, and a digital ID is increasingly linked to the economic health of people. And for some, it is actually a matter of life and death. Therefore, a global multi-stakeholder support is required so that we put citizen-centric digitization towards people's money.
Thank you, Natalie. I hope the participants can see why the Secretariat found itself chasing after all of the task force members, just trying to keep up with some of the ambitious views and insights that they offered. Eric, let me pass over to you. Perhaps a sort of a kind of a sharp view on where you think the UN can make most difference.
I think we thank you. I thank you. UN's continued leadership in driving our SDG and my most important right now is that every stakeholder should take actions. So together in cooperation towards SDGs, no matter how big or small, every action counts. I think the biggest risk is to do nothing. The biggest mistake is to do it alone. That's my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, very much. I think actually that's the shortest and most eloquent argument in favor of many of the strengths of the UN being deployed in this area. Jayla, maybe I can come to you this time as the last in the row. Kind of obviously, you know, as the World Bank Group, you partner with the UN continuously and in many different ways. You know, so you see, you know, the relative strength of different international institutions in ways that few of us can. What would you point to where the UN can really contribute most in this area?
So I think as we all said today, principle-based and inclusive governance of digital finance aligned with SDGs is all the more important and urgent right now to make progress on. We did work very closely with the IMF and came up with the Body FinTech agenda, which was really laying some of the principles. There's a lot of discussion at the G20, as you mentioned. So I think for the UN, it may be very helpful to think about how we can have a framework that could help track, assess, process, progress, and also, as Patrick said, make sure that there is a convening power, that a platform that allows international community, both public and private sector, to catalyze progress, share experiences, and have a vision, a shared vision as to we really need to have a much better, much effective governance and inclusive governance going forward on digital agenda. Thank you very much.
Cela, thank you. And Cela, Eric, Natalie, Patrick, thank you so much for joining this panel, and obviously both to you as 4 of the task force members, but also to all of the task force members, I think all of whom are on the call in various different ways listening in. Thank you so much for your contributions. I'm going to pass over just for the last 3 or 4 minutes of time we have in this session to our co-chairs who have been sitting and listening and I'm sure reflecting carefully, and perhaps ask each of you just to offer for a minute or two some closing reflections. Maria, if I may, I will start with you.
Well, thank you very much, Simon. And again, thank you very much to everyone who has listened in, joined this session, joined this launch, and particularly thank you very much to all our task force members, those who spoke here today and offered their reflections on the task force's work, but also to the colleagues who are on the call. I mean, I think what you've heard from us is really a summary, a set of highlights of what is really a very rich and very comprehensive set of recommendations and a report from the task force. And I want to make 3 points. One is to urge everyone to really take the time to engage with the report. And I want to do that because in putting together this work, we made it our job to engage with people way and beyond the task force members. We did literally engage with hundreds of people across the world, and that was done with a particular purpose in mind. We wanted this report to be a living document. We wanted it to begin to create a set of communities of ideas, engagements, partnerships, challenge not just digitalization and the platforms that it brings and the opportunities and the technology, but really this notion that actually if we are going to use this unique time, it really does have to deliver to people. And so that's one. And I think what you've heard from colleagues in this roundtable is just that. Lots of people already beginning to work together and explore new things, new ideas, and learn from each other. And so many times we don't do that. So that's the first point. The second is that we did actually make a very big shift and pivoted the conversation away just from digitalization and the technology platforms and digital finance even, to that being the enabler, but to really put people at the center of what we were solving for. And if you solve for people and we use the power and the potential of digitalization, then we actually have something incredibly powerful. And if you read and engage with the report, you see that everywhere. And the report has got many examples of that and offers many insights in what is achievable and what is already being done. And the third is the last question you asked of our colleagues on the panel. What can the United Nations do And I think Chayla spoke about this, but the United Nations has this unbelievable opportunity and sits at the center of the ability to convene and allow people from different places and different walks of life in the public and the private sector to come together to engage, to discuss, and to take things forward. And I would really, really encourage that we use the convening power of the United Nations to take some of this work forward and to really use this time and the opportunities created by digitalization to really build back better and to begin to address a world in which people are really at the center, whether that's in finance, but actually in a space much wider than that, and in which digital finance does have an important role to play. So thank you very much, and thanks to everybody who listened in today.
Thank you, Maria, very much. And I have to say, just before handing to Achim, on behalf of the Secretariat, including my colleagues from UNDP and UNCDF, thank you very much for your leadership. You've really been inspiring and informative and encouraging of our unreasonable ambition over the 18 months. Achim, let me hand over to you for some final remarks.
Thank you, Simon. I think just this short panel discussion gives you a sense of quite how on the cutting edge we were able, through the experience, the expertise of our task force members, we were able as a task force to really explore frontiers. And I said in my earlier remarks following Maria that ours was not an objective to second guess the future. Things are moving too fast. But I think one of the things that the task force very early on realized is central to the moment in time is this notion of people's money. We, in the end, chose to call the report People's Money because it says many things. And Eric, you just spoke to it, Natalie, Patrick, and Chayla also. And I think it is the realization that, you know, if our financial system continues to evolve increasingly either in parallel or in contradiction to where the development imperatives, be it climate change, inequality, inclusiveness, are actually staring in our face, then we will see increasingly a political and economic system facing tensions. And the fact that so many are stepping into the streets across the world to protest about what they perceive to be inadequate outcomes of national development choices and pathways, I think is a reminder that people's money can actually both be distributed amongst billions of people, but digital allows us also to aggregate it and to bring it together to create transparency, to connect people to where their money is actually having an impact. And I think this is an important part of the task force's hopefully appeal to all actors to realize that. I think there is no doubt in my mind, and I think just the examples represented by the four of you as panelists here this morning, that digital is a transformational driver of change. The future of development will increasingly be defined by digital possibilities. And I think together with my colleague, Liu Jimin also, we in the UN are clearly in the last few years, first of all, just beginning to catch up with where technology was leading the world, but also something else that particularly for a development program of the United Nations has been very revealing. The digital pioneering work, the new horizons, are not just emerging in the traditional tech centers of Silicon Valley or the traditional tech companies. It is, as the evidence has also shown in this task force, very distributed. Some of the greatest innovations are happening in the countries of the global south. Natalie, you spoke to Zimbabwe, and macroeconomically in a very challenging position, yet able to bring innovations in there that are counterintuitive perhaps to many who would look. And financial, I mean, billions of transactions, hundreds of millions of users, a vision of a company with a centennial horizon. I think these are the sorts of examples that should also teach us very quickly, as Kenya did with M-Pesa. As you often say, Patrick, that's a long time ago. We've moved on. There's many more things that have happened since. But, people didn't pay attention because they didn't realize that the innovation curve, the horizon, the frontier has actually moved across the whole globe. And if you just take China and India together as two key countries also, India with Aadhaar, for example, the biometric registration system, that's 37% of the world's population. Then add Africa into this, and by 2050, 2 billion people. You're talking about extraordinary markets, about extraordinary need for the use of different ways of doing development in the 21st century. And I think this is where governments have such a key role to play. Digital is not just about the next gadget, the next software, the next brilliant idea. It is also about an ecosystem. And Sheila, I'm truly grateful that you have brought the World Bank also into this task force with its full capacity. The UN and the bank work together on many issues such as digital ID, for example, also, which is one of those foundational elements in a digital era. How do we help countries to create digital ID so we don't end up with another era where people who are basically unable to get a digital ID just don't exist in this emerging financial system, but also the fundamental work of working with governments to build the digital foundations. People need connectivity. I understood that Prime Minister Modi has announced just a few days ago that he sees a major initiative now to connect every village with fiber optic in India. That's precisely the kind of generational and transformative vision and projects that we need across the developing world, and frankly, in quite a number of developed economies as well. We need to use this moment of COVID-19 not to be intimidated, and we have many problems. But actually, out of these crises arise some of the greatest changes that have driven development. This is human history. And in that sense, the task force's moment in time, depressing as it was with COVID-19 all around us, may prove in some ways fortuitous, at least in terms of triggering the imagination of people in governments, but also in the private sector. I think we have many leaders in this digital economy that are not only private sector CEOs, they think about the value of digital to society and to development. And Natalie and Eric, you have spoken to it this morning. And I hope that as we move forward, we can continue to foster that ecosystem. That is how we see the role of the United Nations, of the international institutions alongside government, but increasingly also with key players such as yourselves in the private sector, be it technology or finance. And I end by saying that one of the good news, and perhaps not often enough, is that when there's a mission accomplished, we can also dissolve a task force. And I want to take this moment just to let everybody know that while we will have a core capacity to connect the world out there that wants to connect to members of the task force, to the Pathfinder Initiatives, to engage on the findings of the report, that secretariat capacity remains in place. The digital addresses are available, but this is also a moment where the UN actually sticks to its promise. Mission accomplished, the work is done. It is up to us, it's up to everyone right now to take that task force report and work with it, because that's what ecosystems are all about. In that sense, thank you very much. And again, a big thank you, Simon, to you, the Secretariat, the many partners who are not visible today, and also our task force members. They have been extraordinary. Thank you so much. Keep well, and let's look to the future with a sense of optimism while we struggle with the present. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Achim, thank you very much indeed. As with Maria, the Secretariat has been inspired by your leadership. Excellencies, colleagues, thank you for joining us at what clearly is not the beginning of the end, but the end of beginning of a next round, if you like, as the UN and other actors take forward the work of the task force into practice on the ground. We look forward to your feedback and further collaboration. Thank you, and please all do keep safe.